We are so grateful to have Meredith and Dani here in conversation with us today. Our moderator tonight, Dani Shapiro, is the author of the instant New York Times bestselling memoir, Inheritance. Her other books include memoirs Hourglass, Still Writing, Devotion, and Slow Motion, and 5 novels, including Black and White and Family History. Along with teaching writing workshops around the world, Dani has taught at Columbia and NYU, and is co-founder of the Sirenland Writers Conference in Positano, Italy. In February of 2019, Dani launched an original podcast, Family Secrets, in collaboration with iHeartMedia, an iTunes Top 10 podcast. She lives with her family in Litchfield County, Connecticut. Meredith Hall is the author of Without a Map, a memoir that was instantly recognized as a classic of the genre and became a New York Times bestseller. It was named a Best Book of the Year by Kirkus and BookSense and was an Elle Magazine Reader's Pick of the Year. Meredith was a recipient of the 2004 Gift of Freedom Award from A Room of Her Own Foundation. Her work has appeared in 5 Points, the Gettysburg Review, the New York Times, and many other publications. She divides her time between Maine and California. Beneficence is a gorgeous and moving novel about love, loss, family, and forgiveness. Pulitzer Prize winner Richard Russo says, if the word luminous didn't already exist, you'd have to invent it to describe Meredith Hall's radiant new novel. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Meredith Hall and Dani Shapiro. Take it away, ladies.
Dana, thank you so much. And Meredith, it's such a treat to be in conversation with you. If Dana hadn't read Rick Russo's quote, I would have, because luminous is the perfect word to describe beneficence. We were just speaking before we all began about another event that I had done at RJ Julia as a conversation partner with the writer Carrie Arsenal. And at one point, we were asked to talk about like our favorite book that we had read recently. And Beneficence wasn't even out yet. And both Carrie and I, completely having not conferred about this, Carrie went running upstairs because she couldn't remember the title. She went running upstairs in her house to find it because she wanted to shout it out. And as she was doing that, I was shouting out Beneficence, which hadn't even hit the shelves yet. It's such a magnificent novel. It's one of the best first novels that I've read in a very, very long time. And so this is our second conversation, and I'm so happy and really delighted to be here with you. So, you know, so much about the novel. I mean, like, to think about what distinguishes it is, of course, there is a, you know, sort of an extraordinary sweeping family story, the sweep, the cadence, the characters, but perhaps most of all, the voice. It's a book that one starts to read, and within the first sentences, I mean, I'll also say, I'm just at the risk of embarrassing you, but I'll say, your editor, who I don't know personally, sent me Beneficence in galley form with a handwritten letter, asking me if I would take a look at it to blurb. 99 times out of 100, I can't, right? I just can't. We're all so overwhelmed. His letter was so passionate and handwritten and old school and kind of perfect. And I opened it and I began to read. And the moment I began to read, there was that feeling that is so rare of, oh, I'm in very good hands. So without further ado, I would love it, since I really feel like this is such a incredibly voice-driven novel, if you would begin by reading us a passage from Beneficence.
Thank you, Dani. Your support and your praise are truly extraordinary. Thank you very, very much. It matters to me. Your sense of this book matters to me. Thank you. I thought that I would read a section written by Doris. This book is told in 3 voices: Top, the father and husband, Doris, his wife, and the mother, and their 3 children, Sunny, Dodie, and Beston. Dodie is the middle child, a girl, and I decided that I knew that I was going to give Top a voice right from the beginning. I was surprised when Dodie spoke up right from the beginning. She was the first person to speak, actually, when I started writing, and started introducing me to the world that they lived in. And I decided to give Dodie a voice also. So their daughter, throughout this book, adds her voice. She's kind of a truth teller in this story. This is from the very early part of the book. The book starts in the late 1940s and carries through into the 1960s. And this is from the first section, Doris's section, where she is really introducing us to this world. All 3 of these characters are storytellers. They're rememberers. And the book is told in present tense, and yet they're constantly sliding back in these memories and these stories that they want to share with us. And this is one of those memories that Doris is looking back on. Doris and Top live on a farm in Alstead, Maine, and it's a dairy farm. It's a very, very successful farm and a very beautiful place. And she did not grow up on a farm, as you will hear in this section. Once, a year or so before I ever met Top, my father and I closed the store as usual and walked home together for supper. But instead of turning in at our gate, he nudged my elbow and said, "Let's stay out a while longer. It's a nice night." It was nice, a cool late spring night, still lit pink in all the darkness. No stars were out yet, although it was clear. Colebrook was once a busy town, with the mills working 2 shifts and men and women going to or from work at all hours. But then the Depression ended all that. Those were hard years for everyone. I remember that night as a time of quiet, with the mills closed down or on reduced shifts, and absence of the old noise and hellos and good evenings on the sidewalks. The town was out of work, and men and women sat on their doorsteps smoking cigarettes, nodding seriously as we passed, while their children played in the side streets. My father was a silent man, a kind but formal man. We worked together every day in his store, Canton's Grocery, which he had built up enough that he was able to stay open through these hard times. He sold groceries and meat and was known as a good butcher. Women in the neighborhood came every day to buy the food from Jack Canton. He never said more to his customers than he did to me or my mother, but people liked and trusted him. You could see that. I spent my whole childhood in that store. If I wasn't at school, I was there helping out. Sometimes my mother let me go off with a friend who stopped by, and my father always nodded his yes. But I enjoyed being at the store and seldom asked to be allowed to go out. It was an old building my father owned outright, long and narrow, with a counter running almost the length. The meat counter was in the back. It was dark inside the store, warm in the winter and cool in the summer. The floors sloped to the back as if you were walking down a slight hill and then back up, and they creaked in a comforting way. By the time I was in high school, I could have run the whole place myself. I knew the business end to end, the ordering and the stocking, and how to display the produce and weigh and bag the dry goods, how to tally the receipts and put the cash in the safe for deposit at Gardner's Savings each Friday night. I used to say to my father, "I'd like to run the store after you get tired of it." But he would sort of shrug and say, "I don't imagine the man you marry would agree to that." I felt a pang of fear when he said that. unable to picture my future or any of the mysteries it held for me. I must have been about 15 that night he asked me to walk with him. I remember feeling scared. I had never known my father to deviate from his routine, and I felt off balance. Even then, I did not like surprises. We walked elbow to elbow in silence up Jackson Street and across to Governor. Every home had its lights on by then, and the families had all gone indoors for supper, whatever it might be in those times. My father was a generous man and did what he could to help his neighbors, extending credit for basic necessities that might never get paid for. But we were beyond our own little world by then, walking streets I had no reason to be on. My father seemed to have no purpose, no intention in where we walked. And although I was young, and although he said almost nothing, I felt a deep sense of dread, as if he were opening a door onto possibilities that I must resist. And then I sensed that he was crying, silently, the way he did everything. I felt his grief, whatever it was, draw me to him like a gentle but insistent arm. He did not raise his hand to wipe his tears. They flowed down his narrow, tired face, dripping off his jaw and his chin. We walked from pool of light to pool of light away from home. I had a great need to know what this terrible sadness was my father carried, and a great need to never know its name, a sort of superstitious belief that if we did not speak its name out loud, it would never come to find me. I could not imagine what could cause my father such sorrow. Was it simply a loneliness from all that gentle silence? Did he wake up that morning unable to justify the path his small life had taken? But isn't every life small, I wondered, and a gift in its everyday inconsequence? Was this about love? I felt a stab. Did my father long for something more than my mother's steady and practical love? Had he glimpsed something in the store that day, a look or a laugh or a sigh, a small comment about how lovely the springtime air feels on your face, something that reminded him of another life he had once imagined, of something lost forever? Each possibility frightened me. Why did he need me to walk beside him when he let this swelling current pass? Would I ever feel such an awful loneliness in my own life? He never changed his pace. When we got to the bottom of High Street, we turned together back toward home, where my mother waited for her husband and her daughter. The porch light was on, an inquiry into where we had been. My father took out his handkerchief and blew his nose, folded it carefully, and nodded for me to go ahead of him through the door to our family supper.
It's a testament to your book that I remember that passage so well, even though it's been well over a year since I read it. It so encapsulates, I just wrote down this phrase, if we never spoke it out loud, which feels like it's the essence in so many ways of what this novel is about. Yes. Secrets, the keeping of secrets, the unspoken, and what the unspoken does, how it works upon us. And I guess I would love to know from you, I'd love to talk a bit about the genesis. I imagine that some of the people who are with us are writers or are very interested in the process of writing. And I wonder, you said that Doris's was the first voice who began to speak. What did you know at that point? What did you know when you sat down, to embark? Were you embarking on a novel at that point, or did you hear Doris's voice first?
No, I was. I wrote my memoir. It was my first book. I was already in my late 50s when I wrote my memoir. And I was shocked to find out that I was in the world a great deal with that memoir. There was a lot of conversation about it. I traveled around, and you know yourself that when we talk about memoir, we talk about the writing, but we also talk about the life. There it is. And that life of that girl, I talked about a lot. And so I made the decision finally that I wanted to move to fiction and not feel so exposed. So that was the easy decision. Then I needed to figure out what I was going to write. I am a great reader. I've read all my life. I taught narrative writing in fiction and nonfiction in the MFA program that I taught in for many years. So I had confidence in storytelling, and I thought, how hard can this be? I really muddled and muddled and muddled for a very, very long time, trying to figure out what I was doing and what I wanted to write about. I finally, probably 2 years after deciding that I was going to start a novel, my story came to me. I understood instantly from a brief comment that a neighbor made one day. I understood that I wanted to write a book about a man who experienced a great difficulty in his life. Something awful happened. And his response was selfish, self-absorbed, reckless. And I wanted to know how this man lived with himself. I wanted to understand how he explained the decisions that he made that caused harm, added harm to the people that he cared about. And so that's where I started. And I recognized in pretty quick order that this actually was my father. I was estranged from my father, and he had done a lot of harm. And I thought, this is going to be a way for me to enter that way of being in the world. How does a person justify this? So I had my story, and I was very excited about it. I needed something. I wanted to write about something that was morally complex. I didn't want an easy story. I didn't want to have any of the answers. I wanted to be learning every minute of the writing, and this was my story. So I sat down ready to go, and I was shocked to find out that somebody named Doris showed up that morning and started talking to me. And it turns out she was married to Top. And I understood, honestly, within 20 pages, that the man that I had imagined was not the man that I was writing at all. He hadn't even appeared on the page on his own. And I understood that I had it all wrong. And Doris really was the one who introduced me to this man. And she loved him intensely, trusted him, liked him, felt loved by him, felt safe in him. And then it became a story in which this man and this woman experienced together a terrible blow to their family. And so the story went from there. But that's where I started. I thought that I had a bad guy that I was going to write.
Yeah,
it was not Top. Maybe that guy will show up in another book, but that was not Top.
it's so interesting how very different the process of writing memoir and the process of writing fiction are. And in memoir, as someone once said to me when I was struggling with my first one, because I had written novels prior and I was trying to write it as I would write a novel. And a friend of mine said to me, but you know what happened, right? And so the art of memoir is not about transcribing what happened. It's about uncovering the deeper meaning and what connects to what and the undercurrents of what happened.
Yes.
Whereas with fiction, the world is so completely wide open to you when you sit down that, I'm so struck by, and I hope there are fiction writers listening, because I'm so struck by both, you're talking about that period of muddling, which is a necessary period, however long it takes. And then the porousness and the willingness to not insist upon, well, wait a minute, Doris, I don't know who you are. Shut up, Doris. I'm going to write this book about this other guy because that was my plan.
Yes.
And fiction gets ruined if we stick with our plans
too
much.
Yes, I have really no plan when I write. I had only this this general sense of the nature of this one character, and I really needed to be shaken away from that fast. Doris had a much better idea of what this man was going to be and why he would be much more interesting. Mm-hmm. But I have no idea what's going to happen. I have no plan at all. I knew that a tragedy was going to hit this family. That was going to be the test.
Did you know what it was?
I knew that it was going to be.
Don't say what it was. Don't say what it was.
I knew that it was going to be dramatic. I knew that. I wanted it to be a blow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's so interesting too, because that sense of, I know that there's going to be something, and then writing your way toward it without necessarily apprehending it. It's such an act of faith in a certain way. Faith in what? Faith in the creative process, yes. In the unconscious.
Yes.
To have its own coherence.
Yes, I think you're right, Dani. And I think that, I think we speak about a faith in the imagination, but for me, the imagination is the unconscious. That is where it lies. That's what speaks when that exhilarating freedom that it just sweeps me into the writing, that I can do anything. I can write anything. But that is, I am certain, that is me talking still. This is not out of thin air. And I think that the roots, the sources of these stories and these people remains, I think, mostly unknown to us. I think we don't know where they live in us, but I do think they live in us. There's a kind of capturing of them that we do if we prowl around enough.
Yeah, it's mysterious, and I think it needs to remain mysterious in a certain way. And I was struck when you said that when you originally conceived of, I guess, Tup, that he was a bad guy, and that he, now he reminded you of your father, and now you were going to really be able to sort of grapple with, your father and find, and that level of consciousness about what one is doing while one is doing it ends up being the thing that's kind of death to the creative process.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I honestly think that people ask me, do you write to an outline? And it's quite an astonishing question to me. I'm sure that there are wonderful fiction writers who do, but it seems, for me, it would wreck the fun. I know that. There is a trust. Somehow for me, there was actually a trust in these characters, even though the characters were emerging line by line by line, and I was meeting them in those lines. I didn't know them, and I every sentence was moving me toward understanding who they were, and yet I trusted them. I handed the story over to them, and I had a very keen sense that my characters wrote this book. They made this story and wrote this book. I needed to pay very close attention. I needed to be very loyal to them,
And that's that very delicate balancing act, right? I mean, every writer quakes before the page, every writer, no matter how accomplished they are, no matter how long they've been doing it, no matter what accolades they've had, because that feeling of maybe this time, maybe I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. And giving over to that feeling of I don't know what I'm doing. And at the same time, sitting down every day to meet that. I mean, there's a period of time. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the muddling, because that time between books. So Without a Map came out in 2007.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I taught that book. I was teaching a course at the New School in the MFA program called The Literature of Autobiography.
Yeah.
And it was a book that I taught and love to teach and continue to reference when I talk about memoir. And then, yes, as you described, you were kind of out on this public stage with this very, I know this feeling, this very exposing story that was written, in such darkness and privacy. The darkness, by which I mean, you're writing when you haven't published a book yet. You're writing in the cave, yes. And it's a wonderful place to be because you can't possibly imagine what it might feel like to be out of the cave, right?
Yes, and also it granted me a wonderful feeling that nobody would ever read it.
Exactly.
So here I had this wonderful, wonderful sense that I was writing a book for the world, and yet I was also writing a book for a world that was never going to hold this book and open its cover. And so I gave myself permission to write a very, very intimate book.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so then there was a period of time, I'm imagining it was a couple of years, that was consuming, yes. In terms of public events and everything else, and letters from people, and yes. It was a story that struck such a powerful chord. So when you sat down again, well, first of all, what was the turn to fiction? What was the feeling of my next book is going to be a novel, or my next book is going to be fiction? And then what was that muddling through like?
So I had taught memoir writing for such a long time. I had a friend, when I told her I was going to write a novel next, she was horrified and said, "But you're an essayist." And I was really shaken by that, thinking, well, maybe I'll never get this form. Maybe the essay form. I think the essay is I actually believe the essay is the most elegant form. It's an extremely difficult and complex form, and very, very elegant. There's a kind of formality, even in the least formal essay. There's a formality of structure and intent that I really love. And fiction felt kind of a free-for-all. It felt as if it was the guards were off. And that was both very exciting to me, but also quite intimidating to me. And I have to say, I was also struck with a feeling of being intimidated by the success of my memoir. I hit that moment where I thought, I'll never write a book as good as that. That's my one book. And I don't have a right to do this. I don't have the skill to do this. I don't have the intelligence to do this. So that was part of what had me spinning my wheels for a while. But when I finally committed to this, I am going to write a novel, I was very excited about it. I understood the freedom that it was going to allow me. And I was very enticed by that. And I have found that freedom to be really, this is not an exaggeration. It feels drug-like when I am writing fiction. It feels intoxicating. It's just the most wonderful feeling. But that muddling around, I just knew, I know the kinds of books that I like to read, and I knew that I needed to enter a story that was going to be very uneasy. I wanted that uneasiness. I wanted it for me. I wanted it for my readers. And it took me a long time to find the seed of what was going to lead me there.
Mm. Have you thought much about, I imagine you have, the roots of this story, which are inside of the story that you told in Without a Map? There are so many delicate lines of connection where one could never say this is autobiographical, Beneficence, but it's emotionally autobiographical. Do you feel that way?
I didn't know that, Dani.
Yeah, of course.
I had no idea as I wrote this book. As soon as I recognized that Tup was no one that I know, he was not my father, he was no one I know. I needed to find out what Tup was all about. And that was a really joyful moment for me when I recognized that I was happiest being completely cut free from anything that I know. That was what I was after. I loved that. And so I wrote, and this, the family, this book starts off, the first, I don't know, maybe quarter of it is really allows us to live on this very beautiful farm with this family and we're part of their daily routines, part of their work. And we see the very deep and abiding connections between these people. We trust those connections, and they recognize the beauty of the farm. This farm has been in Tup's family for 5 generations, and their rootedness on this land and their gratitude to this land is very clear. So that was joyful writing. That was really joyful writing for me. And I felt I had never lived on a dairy farm. I don't know anything about dairy farms. And so it was a real process for me of opening myself to the imagination of that farm. And I loved all that. And then this event happens. And I found by then I had fallen in love with all 5 members of this family and with their house, their kitchen, their front room, the porch, the barn, the fields. I had just fallen in love with this place. And this event happened, and I had an extremely hard time. It took me probably a year to write my way through that difficult event. And I understood at the time that I had somehow come to love these people that I had somehow rendered, I had made them, and that I had come to love them so much that I was feeling a profound sense of shared grief for their sorrow. And it was only later, and then the book moves on and we start watching their slow process back to beneficence, back to the connection that they have with their farm and the land, and mostly with each other, and their trust in each other. And the book moves slowly away from that event and its effects, and moves them towards something new. They're changed by that event, and they come back to each other with all of the love and the trust and the gratitude, but also the cost is evident too, that will live with them forever. So all of that made sense to me, but what didn't make sense to me was how emotionally distraught I was writing my way through that. And it's only been afterward that I've understood that you're right, that I carried a knowledge of some of this emotional landscape that I just ignored. I just completely ignored it. I had no idea that I was in my own landscape in any way. I would have said, as a matter of fact, I said very boldly to people, I don't know these people. I don't know anything about these people. I don't know people like this. I don't know anybody who has ever experienced anything like this. And it's such a joy to make this up out of thin air.
Yeah.
And I really, it was only later that I started to understand that that I was revealing far more of my own emotional landscape than I knew.
That's why I asked you the question, because not in the classic, how is it autobiographical kind of question, which every novelist gets and comes to really not love. But because I think it illustrates that so much is hidden from us, and you couldn't have known. Had you known, it wouldn't be the book it is.
Yes.
It's like the writer writes and like is the path is illuminated by like a matchstick, and then maybe later the writer comes, or it's pointed out, or the writer comes to see, oh, of course there were these connections that are these delicate lines from there to here, that has to be. We can't write about what we don't deeply in our soul know something about.
Yes.
But that remains hidden from us. It's something that's and for any writers who are listening, I think that feeling is generally presents itself as a feeling of like, I have no idea what I'm doing. But what it is, in fact, is that's the path. So I love that you didn't know, and you couldn't have known.
Yes, and in fact, it was readers' questions when the book first came out. It was readers' questions that brought me to this thinking. And I remember feeling actually a kind of embarrassment, as if I had been caught out somehow at something. How could I have been so unaware? How could I have written this entire book and not have known this? And yet I think you're right. You know, had I had any sense whatsoever that I was tapping into my own experience, it would have failed. Mm-hmm. I think it would have failed. Yeah. So I think we've all seen fiction writing that is autobiography masked as fiction, yes, and it is not successful. It's it can't work.
No, I call that with students. I say it's the difference between writing fiction and fictionalizing.
Yes.
If you're fictionalizing because you're afraid of what so and so is going to think, or of exposing yourself, or whatever the myriad of reasons are, it's not that it's even cheating. It's just that it's kind of there's a self-protection involved that doesn't allow a story to move from seed to flower.
That's right, and I think that any protective armor that we would like to wear has to come off when we do this. It cannot be part of our process. We have to be stripped quite bare to make this work. So I think that when people fictionalize their lives, one of the things that I've observed is that we remember all the wrong things. We're actually remembering things that caught our attention, but those aren't the things that are important and that matter. And so we get it wrong, and readers know we've gotten it wrong. They may not know why, but they can sense that we're on the wrong. The telling of the story is wrong somehow.
I love that, because really it's what's on the periphery.
Yes.
It's what we cannot look dead on at. Yes. And I think the periphery is where fiction happens in a certain way, where we have to grow quiet enough, yes, to receive it, to register it. And I know that can sound like, oh, it's some kind of like magical thing. It's more, I think Colette described it as the art of waiting, just waiting. And when you said before that there was a moment where you overheard something, or there was just this little click, right? It's like this little soft click of, oh, now I see. And even when you saw, you didn't know what would happen next, but there was that feeling of knowing,
yes,
which is irrefutable. It's like falling in love. You can't convince yourself of it. And if you've actually experienced it, it's like, oh, that's what it's supposed to feel like. And I think with fiction, that feeling of that's what it's supposed to feel like. It's supposed to feel like necessary, mm-hmm, right? And clear, not the path, but just this.
Yes, right. There's a kind of laying claim. The instant it arrives, you lay claim to it. It's right. I also think that there is, for me, that the act of writing fiction involves a kind of traveling to a very, very far away place. And I sense that I'm not of the now at all when I write. I am someplace so far away and so unknown. I'm in a territory. I like it. I like being there. I crave it and want to be back there each day. But it feels so far from the realities of my day and the realities of my memory, the realities of what I carry as a person. And it feels, there's a kind of handing over to that distance that is part of it for me, to willingly, it's sort of willingly getting on a train, a silent train that I know isn't going to stop for a long, long time. And when I get off, that's where I'm going to spend my day. That's where I'm going to be.
So in all, from the time that you began Beneficence and Doris started speaking, how many years did it take to get to what became the book?
So I would say that I really slowed down during that the section about surrounding this large event itself. Things moved very slowly there, and then once I sensed that these people actually were returning to themselves in tiny glimmers. Excuse me. Something released in me, and then I was off. And from that point on, it was a matter of months. Within 4 or 5 months, I was done with the rest of the book. So I would say that the entire book probably took something like a year and several months to write. Yeah.
That's so interesting for many reasons. One is that, one could argue, I wouldn't, but one could argue that, well, you're in control. You're the one who's doing these things to them. You're the novelist. You get to decide. When in fact, as a novelist, one is actually kind of standing back a little bit in, like, look what they're doing now. Oh, no. There's such a feeling of not being. You're not in charge of these people. They're sort of in charge of you.
Yes.
And it becomes, something that you're along for the ride with.
Yes, that's exactly right, Dani. This was shocking to me, having written memoir. I used to joke with friends that I scolded these characters periodically, saying, "Can't you just do what I told you to do? Why can't you just behave?" And it was quite an experience for me to discover the kind of integrity that these people had, and they had their lives to live, and they were entirely themselves. They were not me. They were not of me. They were not beholden to me. They were not responsible to me. And if I allowed them that, it really is a process of stepping out of the way and watching and listening. And it was an astonishing process as I discovered that. I honestly don't think there could be anything more thrilling and more gratifying than writing fiction if you are able to move into that place where it's almost as if you're a guest. It's almost as if you're a guest in that place. I love it.
I love that. I think Dana's joining us.
We do have some questions that have been coming in from our guests. Meredith, this question says, I know you mentioned your characters sort of presented themselves to you. How did you choose which 3 point of views you would write from, or did that just come to you as well?
So I had imagined that Tup was going to tell this entire story. And when I sat down ready to write the first day, I felt quite certain about what I was doing. I knew, okay, I'm going to start. And Doris really literally showed up, and she had a name. And after Doris spoke, as Doris spoke, she introduced the family, and she introduced them to me. They had names, Tup and Beston and Sonny and Dodie. And I've never heard these names before. They're unusual names, and I liked them. That sounded great to me. And I knew then, right from the start then, that Doris and Tup would tell this story. But I don't like a kind of bifurcated story. I think that a two-sided story doesn't have balance, actually. Maybe it has too much balance. And I wanted to add a third voice. And I made the decision. Beston interested me, but he was a very, very little boy. And I didn't think he could add enough to this story. And so I settled on Dodie, and I'm glad I did. She turned out to be a truly remarkable girl and young woman. And it was an absolute honor to get to know her as she talked. It was wonderful.
Can you talk a little bit about the time period this book is set in and how you chose that time period? Do you think the family might have done differently if it was set around a time closer to today where there's more community and support?
Yes, I think this is an interesting question. I think this the idea that communities support its members really was almost antithetical to the life that a farm family would have found themselves in the 40s. Their community was kindly. They went to church each Sunday. The church was a source of stability and definition in their lives. But they lived far from town. They couldn't see any other farms, any other houses. They were extremely self-sufficient, and by choice, more self-sufficient than I think farm families needed to be. They liked each other so much. They depended on each other entirely. They defined themselves in terms of the totality of the family and the work they were doing on this farm. I think that Doris especially would have been helped in a time more like ours now. I think that women would have extended themselves to Doris, and it may very well have helped her make her way through the terrible grief that she experienced. Tup, I don't know. Tup. I think the head of a farm family in Maine now, I think still would function pretty much the way Tup did then. But I think that Doris would find herself in a different world now.
Speaking of the farm, the description of the farm and the town of Alstead is so beautifully detailed in the book, which I agree. I could picture everything so perfectly. Are they based on a real Maine town?
No, they are not. I have a general sense of the area of Maine this town would be in. This is just inland, just inside that kind of necklace along the coast of coastal communities, and not very far north. I pictured this someplace south of Augusta, or maybe in the Augusta area, but there is not a particular town or farm that this was modeled on. Okay. The town names are all made up, street names, all of that is just made up.
I love it. I know we've talked a lot about process tonight. What's one piece of advice Meredith and Dani might give to their younger writer selves before they had published anything?
That's a great question.
No pressure.
Yeah, that's a great question. Dani, you want to take that?
Sure, I'll start. I mean, I have a very different trajectory from yours, Meredith. I started publishing really young, and my first novel was my MFA thesis. I was very, I I had a lot to prove to myself and to the people around me, most notably my family. And that's how I felt. And so I was impatient, and I was fortunate in a sense that that first novel was easily published and came out, you know, shortly after I graduated from my MFA program. But I wasn't ready. It wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. And one of the things that I would say to my younger self is what I say to students all the time, which is, this is a marathon. I really ended up having to kind of undo the publication of my first couple of books before and learn to write in public until I actually reached a place where my work was, you know, I think worthy. And I had to kind of do that. And there was good things about that. And I'm grateful to it in a lot of ways, because it did allow me to begin my life as a writer and start teaching. And but I think patience is what I would counsel my younger self.
I might counsel myself at the beginning of my writing life that not to have been quite as patient and to have started younger. So I think in many ways it's been a great gift that I wrote my memoir when I was in my later 50s and this novel when I was in my late 60s. And I think that there is something that my age has brought to this writing that is very valuable, and I'm glad for it. However, I'd like to write a lot of books, and the clock is ticking. And so I think that if I could have urged myself, maybe I would have felt in my mid 40s that I had enough age and now it was time to get started. So I think that there are both gifts. You know, there are gifts for you having started so young, Dani, and as always, there are some costs, and I think I face those gifts and those costs on this end too.
Yeah.
So what's next, Meredith? Do you have something that's in the works, or you have anything that's up and coming?
So I found this with my memoir too. I don't know how writers move. I've been moving with Beneficence in the world pretty much nonstop since October last fall when it came out, and I haven't figured out how to be apart from these people in this story. I'm still so much inside it that I haven't figured out how to leave it alone. I do think a great deal about what comes next, but they are very early questions about what I might like to delve into. I have that same feeling. Ideas come up and I feel disappointed in them because I know that I really am interested in difficult questions, and that's where I'd like to start.
Well, we have two questions left that I think we can end on. We're already at the end of the hour. It goes by so quick. For both Meredith and Dani, do you have a favorite or favorite authors, someone that's particularly inspired you both in your writing? What is on the nightstand?
Well, I think I'd have to go over to my nightstand to look what's on my nightstand, because it keeps on changing. And it's also mostly books that are, well, I was going to say it's mostly books that are coming out, you know, that I'm reading now, that are friends' novels or essays or memoirs. I do always have a couple of books on my nightstand because I like to dip into them. And one is David Eagleman's very small, fascinating, idiosyncratic book called Sum, S-U-M. And another is, I always have a book by my friend Sylvia Boorstein, the great Buddhist teacher. I always have one of her books by my nightstand because I find them comforting at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, that's great. my book stand shifts around a lot too. And I am also reading books for, because it's time to, for various reasons. I'm doing an event with Roxana Robinson, and I'm reading her Dawson's Fall this week, which is historical fiction based on her own family, which is very interesting in light of the conversation that we've had. And also I'm doing a podcast in a week or so with a woman who told me in an email that she had gone back to my memoir. And I write in my memoir about that 16-year-old girl on that beach before I got pregnant, reading Carson McCullers' The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. And she wanted to talk to me about it in this podcast. So I have gone back to my bookshelves, and you can see the state of this original Bantam Giant 35-cent paperback that was a book that I read when I was 16 years old on that beach. And I am going to go back and read it. And that's a strange revisiting, I will tell you. It's going to be curious. I often read W.G. Sebald. He fascinates me. I like writers who give me permission to do certain things, and Sebald often gives me permission to do things that I'm interested in. And I am just picking up The Emigrants, which I very.
I envy you just reading it.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. I also want to add, because I was thinking about my nightstand and not looking around my office at what I'm in fact reading right now. Ruth Ozecki's new novel that just came out, I think last week, is brilliant. And it's called The Book of Form and Emptiness. And it's a glorious novel. And then in the nonfiction category, Rebecca Donner's book, All the Frequent Trouble of Our Days, is a biography of sorts of her great aunt who fought in the resistance in Nazi Germany, an American woman who fought in the resistance. And it's an extraordinary feat of biography and she plays with the genre a lot in ways that are really interesting. And to go back to what Meredith was saying, the whole idea of anything that you can read that gives you permission, where you see a writer on a total high wire act,
yes,
pulling it off. There's nothing more exhilarating.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
And all of these fantastic recommendations are being linked in the chat box on your Zoom screen, everyone. So I know a few of you were asking if you could have direct links. So they're right in there for you. One final question, Meredith, for our readers who have not read Beneficence yet. What do you hope they take away from the book once they are finished reading?
So the title of this book is very interesting to me. While its working title, the whole time I worked on this book, the last name of this family is Centers, with an S, the Center family. And I just called it The Centers or The Center Place for all those months. And my wonderful, brilliant editor, Josh Bodwell, suggested, he was not happy with my working title, and he suggested along the way Beneficence. And I thought it was a very odd suggestion. It's a big word, and I really wasn't certain about how it can speak for this book. But then when I said, okay. And later, as I was doing copy edits, I came across the word beneficence, and I was very surprised. And I read on and moved through the book, and I found the word beneficence again. And so I did a search. I used the word beneficence 4 times in this book. And I've come to feel that if there is something that I hope readers find in this book, it's a shared sense of faith in our goodness and in the power, it has become cliched, the power of our love for each other. I think that I think we each carry beneficence, and I think we seek beneficence. I think it's a state of being that we want and that we seek. And we only find that in deep, trusting connection with other people. And it was beneficence that allowed this family to finally find its way back to each other and to their profound sense of gratitude for where and how they live together. So I think beneficence is what I hope people pick up.
It's beautiful. I mean, everyone, if you've not gotten a chance yet, you need to pick up this book. It needs to accompany your bookshelf. Hold it, read it, love it, because it's just simply gorgeous. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight for this conversation. I especially want to thank Meredith and Dani. Thank you so much for being with us. It's been an honor to host you both. And Meredith, for such a beautiful and heartfelt book. Thank you for releasing Beneficence into the world. Beneficence is out now. It's available for purchase online, in store, RJ Julia, BookHampton, and Wesleyan RJ Julia. Thanks everyone so much. Happy reading and have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
You
Thank
too.
you, Dani. Good night.
Good night.
Take care.